All right, good morning, everyone. Hope you all are having a good day today. So I was looking over the schedule, and I realized Chapter 18 and Chapter 19 are pretty short. So I just went ahead and combined them. So we'll present them both today. Won't be a problem. All right, so Chapter 18 is all about disaster recovery planning. Okay, so specifically, we're going to start off by talking about what a disaster is, talk about system resilience, talk about recovery strategy, recovery plan development, training, awareness, and documentation, and testing and maintenance. Let's talk about a natural disaster. Natural disaster, as the name would imply, is a disaster that wasn't caused by man. It was caused by nature. All right? You got your earthquakes. You got your hurricanes, tornadoes, snow, floods, fires. Now, fires are an interesting one, and so to an extent floods are as well. Because humans can cause fires, definitely, right? Is it possible to start a fire? Not a good idea in a lot of cases, but it's possible. Okay? What about a flood? How can a human cause a flood? Okay, build a dam, build it poorly, you cause the flood. Alright? You get the idea. I don't think humans can really cause snow. You might say those little snow machines they have at the slopes, whatever. Just understand a natural disaster is something that's not directly caused by a human. And you got human-made disasters, okay? Stuff caused by people, okay? You got fires, You got arson, but you got accidental fire starting too. All right? Say you're up in the woods. You ever start a campfire? Well, they say you're supposed to smother it, right? Make sure it's completely out. Why? Okay, because is it possible that the ashes could, blow in the wind and maybe catch some leaves? The leaves start catching some little sticks. Next thing you know, you have a forest fire. I think something like 85% of forest fires caused by lightning and other natural things. But hey, 15% is no small number, is it? Acts of terrorism. I don't think I need to explain that one too much. Bombings and explosions. Okay? Again, very bad idea. All right, but it's a human-made disaster. And I would even take this a step further and probably say that bomb threats, because let's face it, a lot of bomb threats don't materialize, do they? No, I'm not complaining, all right, but, sometimes they do, so you have to take them seriously. Power and utility outages. Now again, this could probably also go into man-made disaster, not man-made, natural disasters, could it not? Say lightning strikes a power line, causes a surge, blows up a bunch of equipment. That's not human-made, is it? Is it going to cause power outage, though? Yeah. So it could go either way. Network and infrastructure failures, on the other hand, pretty much anything is going to be caused by some human action. Is that fair to say? Pretty much. I'm not saying 100%, because let's face it. Let's say, for whatever reason, you ran copper in between two buildings. What do we know about copper? Interference, and more specifically, or more generally, what is copper? Okay, it's a wire made of what? What is copper? Metal. We know that metal conducts what? Electricity. Because if you run copper between two buildings, that copper is going to attract lightning. That's why you don't run copper between buildings. It's not because of speed, it's not because of latency. It's because of the fact that it's going to conduct. It's going to basically act as a lightning rod. And what happens if lightning strikes copper? I mean, let's face it, this is not exactly a really low gauge wire we're talking. Okay, Lightning is going to go to all the different stuff on your network. I've seen it. Okay? It'll burn NICs. Could potentially go so far as to fry motherboards that are connected via hard wire. How do you avoid that? That's a good way. Let's say you did anyways. How could you avoid it? Well, the insulator wouldn't really be able to stop lightning. All right, so the answer is a surge protector. All right, on both ends, you would place an RJ45 surge protector and you ground it. I mean, sure, it's not going to stop that particular run from getting trashed, but it's going to keep the lightning off your network. And you definitely don't want lightning on your network. That could start a fire, by the way. Not a joke. But anyway, most of the time, we're talking about network infrastructure failures. We're talking about something that's caused by a crappy configuration. Okay, is that fair to say? So poor configuration leads to us having all sorts of problems. All right, some of the problems include things like interruptions to availability, interruptions to confidentiality, possibly even interruptions to integrity. I think to some extent, I think you can make an argument that integrity will probably be the most important. Would it not? A data breach is bad, but is it not worse if someone adjusts your billing? Is that not worse? I think it's worse. Hardware, software failures. Pretty self-explanatory. And crime. Don't be a criminal. All right? If you're going to be a criminal, don't be a stupid criminal. All right? But don't be a criminal. That's the important takeaway. All right? How does crime cause disasters? What is crime? Okay, theft is an example. Give me a general definition of crime. Breaking the law, exactly. And specifically breaking the criminal codes. Okay, because you can break laws and it's not crime. Is that fair to say? There's all sorts of other types of laws that don't deal with criminal offenses. You break the criminal code, all right, you're a criminal, crook. Where do you belong? Jail. That's exactly right. All right, so how does human-made disasters relate to crime? Who are criminals? Okay. Well, there's only one species that are criminals, right? Who are they? Humans. So if a human does something criminal, it could cause a human-made disaster. Let's think about the definition. So how do we avoid all this? Well, I mean, frankly, most of that stuff we cannot avoid. Okay, we cannot reasonably avoid having, outages caused by disasters. What we can do is mitigate them. So what we're doing, we're trying to get this idea of system resilience, such that if something occurs as negative or adverse, we can still function. Okay, so the goals here, reducing the amount of downtime that the system experiences. Okay, if we're a company, doesn't matter which size, if no business can be conducted unless there is very specific circumstances, we know we're going to lose money from any outage, right? So we're going to reduce that downtime. And of course, those specific circumstances would be something to the effect of a monopoly that would have basically no substitute products or services that would be able to fulfill customers' needs, and there would have to be pent-up demand. Okay, those three things are pretty unlikely. Can anyone think of any company that may be true for? No substitute products or services. Literally, it's just a monopoly. I'm not even talking geographic monopoly, because if it's a geographic monopoly, in most cases, you'll be able to go to the next county over and do whatever. right? Name one case where that would be true. I can't think of any either. Okay? I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I am saying it's unlikely. So you want to reduce your downtime. Now, let's say you were that company. Okay? Should you be as focused on reducing downtime if downtime doesn't cost you anything? Probably not. Alright? Let's face it, y'all are upperclassmen. Alright? Getting business degrees. Would that not be a pretty poor business decision? Invest resources in something that has literally no benefit? It would. So, one way to go about reducing downtime is to eliminate single points of failures. Okay, so I always talk in this class and networking as well about redundancy. The idea that we have multiple things that can perform the same function. Because the idea is that if one has a failure, others can continue to be functional. Okay, so fault tolerance. Fault tolerance is a mindset of designing a system in which your goal is really to ensure that something out of the ordinary will not adversely affect your company. Okay, this can be in a lot of different ways. All right, think about when you're doing programming. All right, you want to have error handling in place, right? So that if you have an error, your program doesn't crash. It simply catches the error and it does what you tell it to with the error. Surely you all have covered that in some of your programming classes. All right, high availability. So the idea behind high availability is you're not scaling to 100%. So if you have demand, of a system, I think it's pretty fair to say that it's going to look about like this. Okay, high availability means you don't have this be your ceiling. Okay, because let's face it, is 100% utilization high availability? What happens if we get some marginal spikes here? Okay, well, it's possible. More likely, they wait. All right. So if you use a sluggish system, that's what's happening. They didn't factor in high availability. So how can we avoid that? Well, if we have on-premise hardware, again, like Aiden was saying, you would have more available than you need. Is that cost effective? No, it's not. Why not? Okay, this is already, we already have excess capacity. Look at all this. Look at all this. Yeah, that's already excess capacity, right? So if we were to have this, that's going to be even more excess capacity. It's a better way. That's a C. Come on, you guys know the answer. So we talked about on-premise, you would have to buy more hardware. Cloud, exactly right. Okay, so a cloud, all right, you have high availability because you can scale. So if you're at one of these little peaks, you pay a little bit more and you address the peak. But if you're down here, you're paying a lot less. Okay, because let's face it, there are 24 hours in a day. All right, so if we draw the globe, I pretend this is a good drawing of a globe. You got a bunch of time zones. Looks something like this. All right. So while the United States may have something that, kind of between here and here, just let's face it. I mean, you got Eastern time probably starting off over here. You got Pacific and what are some of those Alaskan times? Anyone from Alaska? I don't know what the time zones are in Alaska, but I think they're a good 5 or 6 hours outside of the Eastern, right? Okay. So that's the idea. But let's face it, the United States ain't the only country in the world. All right. You got your Europe stuff over here. You got your Asia stuff over here. That's why cloud computing makes sense. Okay? Does everyone understand that? So the cloud computing provider is able to use the different systems for different clients at different times. And they're able to maintain close to 100% utilization. But any given client is able to realize the effect of that scale. Beyond that, if you got a small company, think they have a really robust IT department? Probably not. They might have one person who's good at desktop support, maybe good at network configuration, but they probably don't have someone who's able to achieve this type of scale. That's almost a given. Does everyone understand high availability? All right. How do you achieve resilience? Well, the main way is just to have stuff in place that is going to prevent any failure from occurring. So, don't think of any of these as being in order. Don't think of this as being one of these will get you there. It's more of a mindset about ensuring that not one single event can really cause a lot of damage. So, have RAID. All right. Redundant array, inexpensive disk. There's also some other thing that it stands for as well. All right, but the idea behind RAID is that, unless you're using RAID 0, of course, which is striping, you're having your disk laid out to where if one of them fails, you don't lose the data. All right? So, why is that beneficial? Why do we care if a disk fails? Okay, so without using RAID, you would lose it. Now, are there other ways to back up without RAID? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, but this is one example of a technology that can help you achieve resilience. Redundancy, we've talked about that. I don't think I need to go through that again. We just talked about fault tolerance. Okay, trusted recovery is an interesting one. Okay, so the idea behind trusted recovery is that basically it's like a backup that can fully restore if it needs to on its own. It's going to be common in a lot of like POS terminals, okay, where basically when you reboot them, okay, they don't have a ton of non-volatile storage. So what do? Basically reconfigure themselves to whatever settings you told them to. It's interesting for certain applications, it's not going to be applicable for everything. Okay, quality of service. So quality of service, the idea is that you're probably going to prioritize certain protocols. Okay, now when we think about which protocols may be more apt to prioritize, you think we're going to be prioritizing TCP or UDP? In general. Okay, UDP. Why? What is UDP mostly used for? Is it used for downloading large files, or is it used for, say, real-time streaming of voice, audio, video, whatever? Okay, so why do we want to have quality of service policies to promote that? Not necessarily what you're using the most, but is it fair to say that if a download gets throttled, hey, no biggie. You can basically drop half the packets of a download. Drop more than that, of course, but just in general, you can drop a lot of packets of a download. And what happens? It just re-downloads those the next chance that it gets, right? What happens if you drop anything on a audio call? Okay, you just don't hear what they said, or potentially, in even worse cases, you sort of hear it with a huge delay, or you hear it all garbled. Not good stuff. That's the idea behind quality of service. So, what does this mean for strategy? All right, so recovery strategy. Now, I personally don't think the term strategy is a great term here. I would say recovery plan. Hey, I didn't write the textbook. All right? So you're going to consider your business a strategy. If you were a cost leadership firm, you would consider that. Okay, if you're a differentiation firm, you would consider that. Okay, so how might it differ if you're a differentiation firm versus if you're a cost leadership firm? How might your recovery plan differ? You know, think of strategic management, right? Sydney, how might they differ? So, let's talk it out. What's differentiation? Okay. So, if you're setting yourself apart, do you want to be turning away customers because your POS system is down? No. That's a bad look. I was at the mall Saturday. Well, I'm not going to say what I was doing there, but I was doing something there. All right? And if their POS system were down, I wouldn't be too happy, would I? Place I spent a good bit of money. All right? Now, let's say that I was at Walmart. Or not Walmart. Let's use a better example. The General. Okay? I'm a big fan of the General, but it's not for everyone, is it? All right? So if you go into Dollar General and their POS system is down, you basically just shrug and say, well, it's Dollar General. Do you not? Okay, you probably do. So Dollar General, in most cases, is going to be a cost leadership firm, right? So their recovery plan may be a lot different than someone who's differentiation focused. All right? Always consider your strategy. Now, directly below that, consider your profit and revenue. Is there anything in business more important than profitability? What? Why is that more important than profitability? And you might say that would affect revenue, which would eventually affect profitability, right? So you would still say that profitability is the most important thing in business. Now, if you're not a for-profit company, stuff changes. But if you're a for-profit company, you do not survive without profit. Okay? Now, to get profit, you obviously have to have some amount of revenue. And you have to have expenses that are reasonably low. But you always want to consider profitability. And in some cases, you would consider profitability before strategy. Now, that's not the textbook answer. That's not what they're going to teach you in business schools. All right? But let's face it. Is it not more practical to think about how to drive profit than about some, lofty strategy that, let's face it, pretty much only the C-level care about? Okay. I think it's more practical to think about profitability. However, not to say you wouldn't consider strategy. And then lastly, the organization's needs. What does the organization need to be resilient? What do they need to be able to have a strong recovery plan in place? So that's going to vary by every organization. Again, if you're comparing a very high-end boutique to Dollar General, it's going to be a big difference there, is it not? So recovery strategy, a recovery plan. I like the term recovery plan better. It's going to address a lot of things. How do you handle crises? So what may an example of a crisis be? Well, it could be anything. It could be you don't have any water at your store. Okay, let's face it. What happens if you don't have any water at your store? No one can use the restroom for one thing. What else? Okay. So yeah, no one can get a sip of water unless they already have the water out. How do you handle that? It's going to depend on the company. I think in a standard retail store, does it not make sense to just close for the time you don't have any water? If you don't have water, how are your employees going to use the restroom? Okay, that's a big consideration. Now, not every retail store is required to have public restrooms, so that's not a consideration. But who wants to work without being able to have facilities available? Okay, I think I've explained that amply. Emergency communication. How do you communicate when normal ways to communicate are down? Imagine a scenario where cell towers are down, where power lines are down, where fiber optic cables are down. How do you communicate? Smoke signal, maybe. How else? Well, the cell towers are down. How are you going to use voicemail? We're also assuming that basically all utilities are down. This one starts with an R. Radio. Exactly. Okay, so with radio, it is the tower. It's a sending and receiving. Okay? So it's basically a peer-to-peer sort of environment. Now, obviously, you don't want to be saying anything that you wouldn't say in public, because you are saying it in public. Yeah. Why do police departments use radios? It's not relying on anything. Emergency communication. Now, that's not the only way. Could your emergency communication plan be to have, I don't know, someone drive around to employees' houses on a ATV? Could. If you have a company about 25 people all located within, 30, 40-mile radius of each other, someone plans a route out, and then in the event of any disaster, go around on an ATV. What about four-wheel drive jacked up truck? Who drives a four-wheel drive jacked up truck in here? Nick, you drive a four-wheel drive jacked up truck? I do know it. You might be the emergency communication person. It's possible. Now, you might think, well, when is all that stuff going to go down? It happens all the time. Hurricanes. They knock out everything. Now, not every hurricane does, certainly, but you get a big hurricane roll through an area, like 2005, Hurricane Katrina. There were no cell towers. I mean, there were, but they weren't obviously working. There were no phone lines. There were no power. There's no water for that matter. I mean, there was water, but not potable drinking water. Companies still operated. That's what they used. They used radios, and they used however they could get to people they needed to communicate with. That's not fun. Okay, I'm not saying that's a fun thing, but that's reality. Okay, alternative processing sites. Pretty self-explanatory. So you have one site that you're processing in. You should probably have a different one. Going back to Katrina. There was a pretty big clothing brand headquartered in New Orleans. That was their only way to process transactions. So for 2 or 3 weeks, they didn't sell anything in any other store. Is that bad? Awful. System recovery, we talked about that as well. So what actually goes into a recovery plan? Well, just like with pretty much any business document, you're going to start off with an executive summary. Okay, you're going to summarize what the document is about. Okay, and you're going to have maybe 3 to 5 paragraphs here, just kind of giving a brief outline of what's included, that sort of stuff. Okay, now directly after that, you're probably going to have a table of contents, but then you're going to go in and talk about department-specific plans. So not every department's going to be doing the same thing, are they? For instance, Let's say that facilities are closed. Do you really need to have cleaning staff if no one's in the building? No, they can take some time off. However, what about your teams that are driving revenue? Do you not want them to have a way to continue to drive revenue for your company? What do you guys think? You definitely do. That's why it's department specific. So basically, most of your support activities are not going to be as vital here as a primary business activity. Okay? I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Now, the exception may be IT. Okay, because with IT, while it may not be a primary business activity, is it fair to say it's pretty integral to most companies' revenue at this point? All right, let's say you're a hotel. How do you find a hotel? Do you open up the yellow pages, find the 800 number and give them a call? Who does that in here? How do you find a hotel? Okay, Google, what do you do? Okay, so you Google hotel for whatever area you're going to be in. You compare prices and reviews. Okay, do you book online? If you had an issue booking a particular hotel online, would you not just find another hotel instead of giving them a call? Okay, most people, especially younger people, are not going to be calling some 800 number to book a hotel. Okay, so if their IT systems are down, that is lost revenue. There's not going to be pent-up demand for a hotel, very likely. Because guess what? One hotel room not as good as another, in most cases at least. I mean, excluding stuff like bed bugs and nasty places you don't want to be. You get 2 chain hotels. You just want to crash for a night. You're on the road. Well, do you care if it's a Marriott or a Hampton? You don't care, do you? Who cares? Do you care, Aiden? Okay. You got your Marriott Advantage? Okay. Well, but I'm saying like Marriott and Hampton, they're both going to be fine, right? They probably would be. Well, I mean, you would check reviews and stuff. So I'm saying if you had 2 similar, but they're just different chains, unless you're an Advantage member at one, then you probably don't care. Technical guides for IT systems. We just talked about that, didn't we? Okay, checklists. All right, checklists are going to be very important because what they're going to do is they're going to have sort of pre-thought out things to do in case of various types of disasters. And my advice is instead of focusing on an individual disaster, focus on what the disaster affects. So for instance, if for whatever reason people cannot get to a physical building, does it matter whether there's a downed tree in the road or whether a sinkhole took out the road? Does that matter? The end effect is people can't get to the building. So my advice is to, instead of focusing on disasters themselves, focus on what the effects of the disaster are. Okay, and the important thing here is that you're going to distribute this across your organization. Because let's face it, say one day you're home and you can't get to the office. Maybe there's 10 feet of snow on the ground, the plows can't run, it's a disaster. By the way, I hope that doesn't happen. But if it were to happen, you have these full copies distributed, you go, flip to the page where no one can get to the office, and it gives you a checklist of what to do. All right, training and awareness, extremely self-explanatory. All right, let's face it, no one's going to have fun doing this. All right, but it's important because it informs people what to do in the event that they cannot do what they would normally do. All right, and the way you go about this, there's no one way. You may decide to hold a company-wide meeting, gather everyone into a room, and give a PowerPoint presentation. You could do that. You may decide to have a company picnic and informally present about it for a couple of minutes. You do that too. You may decide to send out a lengthy email. You know, I'm not a big fan of lengthy emails, but it's certainly a way you could conceivably disseminate information, is it not? All right. So some different types of ways to test our plans. All right, hopefully we don't test them once a disaster hits. Hopefully we test them before. So read-through tests, you basically just have a couple people together, read through the plan, try to poke holes at it. Structured walkthrough, you're basically going to do a little bit more involved than just reading through it, and you're going to have some sort of scenarios in place. But simulation test, where you actually would simulate some disaster occurring and seeing how you would actually respond based on the policies. So basically, read through, just looking through it. Simulation test, you're sort of testing it. And then structured walkthrough sort of in between those. Does that make sense? Parallel test. All right, so parallel test, you have like half the company operating under the emergency policies. You have the other half just operating normally. Full interruption test. Okay, this one's probably a bad idea. All right, because you're disrupting your own business and there's not even anything bad happening. Does that not sound like a bad idea? So there are many other types of tests you could do that don't involve fully interrupting your company. Now, who disagrees? Does anyone disagree? It'd be more fun if you would, but that's okay. Okay, so then, whatever type of test you do, you're going to reflect on it, have lessons learned, sort of like a post-mortem discussion, and see what may need to be tweaked or edited within the plan. Finally, you're going to have maintenance of said plan. All right, just to wrap up, we talked about disasters. All right, next chapter is 19. We're talking about investigations and ethics. Okay, so I'm going to talk about investigations first. We'll talk about major categories of technological crime, and we're going to talk about ethics. Got a little disclaimer here, okay? You should not take anything from this class to be legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not your lawyer, okay? Seek qualified attorneys for legal advice, and follow any instruction at your own risk and peril. It's also not financial advice. All right, why do I say that? Because I don't want to get held accountable for anything I say. Okay, let me rephrase that. I don't want to be legally responsible for anything I say. All right? So I don't want to have anyone sue me saying that I gave them legal advice. I don't. Okay, I'll tell you my interpretation of a law. That's a lot different than me saying, this is what the law says. Does that make sense? Further, it's not the role of an instructor to tell anyone what is ethical. I don't want to change your opinions on morals or ethics. No desire to do that. All right? Frankly, I don't really plan on having a big discussion about it. All right? Different types of investigations. Administrative. So administrative investigation, it's usually going to be company specific, where your company has internal policies. And if someone's accused of violating one of those policies, that's going to be an administrative investigation. Criminal investigation. Commit a crime. That's a violation of criminal code, is it not? Because if you violate criminal code, what happens to you? Okay, you get locked up. Or you could pay a fine. Like, let's say you're speeding. All right, that's breaking the law. But who locks you up for speeding? All right, that'd be not a very nice thing to do. I think reckless, well, I'm not going to get on my opinion about reckless driving. But I don't personally think, well, I'm not going to say what I personally think. All right, civil. Civil dispute. Often this involves contractual disagreements. Domestic stuff like divorce. Civil. It's not a crime, but it's civil. Okay? So you got a civil court. All right, you got different types of those. Regulatory. It's kind of funny. I always say regulations have no teeth, and they don't. But they can still investigate you for not violating a regulation, for disregarding a regulation. Now, even like the SEC, there are very few cases that they've actually successfully prosecuted. All right, I'm not going to say whether that makes them ineffective. You can have your own opinion about that. You can have your own opinion about whether they should exist. But in general, regulations have no teeth. All right. Now, not every regulation has no teeth. Okay. Something like FERPA. Okay. What's FERPA? Okay. Family Legislation Rights and Privacy Act, 1974, states that information can't be disclosed without prior authorization from the student in higher ed, and it can't be disclosed to anyone but the parent in K-12. All right. Now, if I violate that, what's going to happen to me? Literally nothing. Okay. Just being honest. Literally nothing. All right, you cannot find a case where someone was successfully sued over violating FERPA. Now, Title IX, that's a different story. FERPA, cannot find a case where someone violated it. Well, you can find cases where someone violated it. You can't find a case where they were successfully sued for violating it. I think it's only been in about 4 or 5 lawsuits in total ever. And that was not the focus of the lawsuit. It was just something that happened that was recorded. Now, I'm not here to say ignore regulation. Let me be clear. Okay? I think that'd be a bad idea. What am I here to do is to say, think about it. Okay? Does a regulation make sense to follow? Is it enforced? How is it enforced? Because there's a lot of regulations on the books that aren't enforced at all because they don't make any sense. Certain states still have laws in the books saying, I'm just being blunt, they have laws in the books saying females can't pump their own gasoline. Is that enforced anywhere? No. Should you follow it? Well, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I think I can't see a reasonable reason why you would follow something like that. Does that make sense? Industry standards. Our industry standards are a little bit different than regulations because most of the time it's going to be some collaboration between various competitors. They form a standard. And it doesn't have to be between competitors directly. It could also be through some alliance, like IEEE is a very common example of this, where IEEE will make a standard. For example, IEEE 802. What is that the standard for? Standard for networking, right? And then we have more advanced, or not more advanced, but more specific standards like 802.11, 802.1x, 802.3. These are all different standards that relate to different parts of networking. Now, most of those, it's like something you voluntarily agree to. Okay, if I voluntarily agree to something, am I really legally bound by it? Yes and no. Okay. You're not required in most cases to follow industry standards. However, if you don't follow them, you can potentially be sued. I'm not going to go into, what would cause a lawsuit, what wouldn't, but most of the time you get in trouble for saying that you adhere to something you don't. Does that make sense? So that's likely what you're getting in trouble for, and not actually the violation of the industry standard itself. So for instance, if I were making a laptop, and 802.11 states that the radio can have a certain amount of power. Let's say that I put more power than the regulation states inside. It will still work with Wi-Fi, will it not? Yeah, it will. But what can I not use? I can't use any Wi-Fi branding on it, because that will be a violation. And then you start getting into trademark and stuff. Electronic discovery. All right. The best thing about discovery is avoiding it in the first place. All right. So you can only discover what's there. Does that make sense? So you'll hear a lot of VPN companies say, we don't keep logs. Well, is that even possible to not keep logs for any period of time? No, it's not possible because you have to route packets. But let's hold them at their, what they mean is we don't keep logs for more than, I don't know, 15 minutes. Okay? You get a discovery notice, you know, whatever's on the logs is going to be gone by the time you get around to discovery, is it not? Definitely. Okay? So the best part about discovery is avoiding it. So the idea is that there's a lot of different parts to discovery. So you have information governance. It's going to be basically where you tell them how the information they're looking for is organized. Maybe some general file structures, that sort of stuff. Okay? Move on to identification. It's where they're identifying what they're looking for. Preservation. Okay, if you get a preservation order on something, it means you legally cannot modify it. You cannot delete it. All right? Collection. It's where they actually collect it. Processing. It's where they basically process and do whatever they need to it to ensure that it's ready to go for court. Okay, then you have review, you got analysis, and presentation. Basically, you're just getting it ready to be used as evidence in court. Now, why do I say you should avoid discovery? Again, I'm not saying you should purposefully delete anything that is in discovery. However, why do I say you should avoid it in the first place? Exactly. Think back to when you were in high school. All right? You want your mom to look through your cell phone? Why not? She almost certainly will she not? Same thing with discovery. Now, the good news is discovery has a narrow scope, just like a search warrant. Doesn't mean they don't see other stuff, though, does it not? So keep that in mind. Evidence. Okay, so the end result of discovery is probably going to be evidence. Okay, and the idea here is you have evidence that is usable. It's going to be admissible. It means it could be going into court. For evidence to be admissible, it has to have three things. It has to have relevance, which relates to, is it relevant to what you're trying to prove? Okay, it's got to be material. It has to relate to the specific case. All right, and then lastly, it has to be competent. It has to be legally obtained. Now, legally obtained is an interesting area because if you think about it, something could be legally obtained by law enforcement. They're probably going to have to either have consent or a warrant, right? Okay, that's correct. However, if you're not law enforcement, you have to have a warrant. You can't steal something, but you can collect evidence in other ways. All right? So, competent is not only related to the specific process that it was gathered by, it also relates to who did the gathering. All right? Again, legal matters are tricky. All right, I'm not a lawyer. All right, and if I were, I wouldn't be giving legal advice. But general advice is to not maintain stuff that puts you in a bad light. All right? I'll leave it to you what that means. All right? But the idea behind a lot of this is that, I'll use an example. Let's say I have two government employees. And let's say that they're communicating via personal devices. Let's say they're texting each other. Okay? So if they're texting each other about government matters, those texts are subject to stuff like FOIA and state record laws, like Colorado is CORA. Okay? Everyone understand that? However, on personal devices, there's no requirement to maintain said text messages. So hypothetically, two government employees could text each other incriminating stuff, immediately delete the messages. That's not violating anything. Now, if their phones go to discovery and then they start deleting messages, that's a violation. Okay, I believe that's a felony. All right, so you don't want to do that. But what I'm saying is that if you're going to do something unethical, or I'm not even going to say unethical, if you're going to do something violating policies and laws, don't maintain a record about it. Does that make sense? Okay, so you got some real different evidence types. You got real evidence. Real evidence is going to be what you present to the court. Okay, documentary evidence. Okay, so it's going to be evidence that is formally documented there. Testimonial. Someone's basically giving a testimony. Okay, they're under oath. If they lie, it's perjury. All right, then you have demonstrative evidence. So demonstrative evidence is not necessarily going to be directly presented to the court in all cases, but it's going to relate to basically facts and deductive reasoning type stuff. All right, so we got some technological crime we're going to go through. Okay, you have military and intelligence attacks. Okay, I hope this isn't something we see in our lifetime, but it's not an impossibility that we see it in our lifetime, is it? In fact, we already have. Okay, think about Stuxnet. What was Stuxnet? Okay, it was an attack believed to be perpetrated by Israelis, was it not? Okay, so the Israelis are believed to be behind Stuxnet. Okay, it targeted a lot of energy production in the Middle East. All right, that's a military and intelligence attack. Business attack. Any attack on a business. Could be physical, could be, in this case, we're talking about technological, aren't we? Say I have a disgruntled employee, walks in with a sledgehammer, goes to the server room door, bangs a sledgehammer, opens the door, goes over to the server rack, bangs the servers. Okay? If you're using mechanical hard drives, your data's gone. Is it not? Technological crime. Financial attacks. Simple. Taking money that's not yours. It's a financial attack. Terrorist attack. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Grudge attack. Okay, you have an employee who dislikes your company. Okay, that's a grudge. Anytime someone doesn't like you, doesn't like your company, they do something against it, that's a grudge. Thrill attacks. They just enjoy it, Simplest way to say it. Alright? So, I hope none of you enjoy committing crime. Alright? But let's face it, is it not fun to speed? Not the police, you can tell me. It's fun to speed, is it not? Okay. Well, I mean, sure, you don't want to go 100 around some of these mountains up here, but you want to go a good 50 or 60 minimum, I think. If you're like me. I'm not talking about front hill, by the way. I wouldn't recommend going 50 or 60 down front hill. If I'm talking, some of these more reasonable mountain roads, they got a speed limit 45, you push a good 60, 65, you'll be all right. Well, okay. Don't take that as advice, but you get the idea, okay? It's fun to commit. Okay, I'm not going to say that either. Some people find it fun to commit certain crimes. That could be a motivation. Why do I speed? Is it because I'm late, or is it because I enjoy it? Probably the latter in most cases. Activists have some political motivation for doing what they do. All right, I think we've got. We're almost out of time. I'll go through ethics really quickly. All right, there's a lot of different ethical guidelines. Your company may have some. You may also have some for your industry. And you really want to consider what you value and what you want to do with them. So I didn't really want to say much about ethics anyway. Just understand that. All right? Any questions about today? Yeah, it will probably be intelligence related. That's probably a good place to